We've just explored the intricate dance between the frontal cortex and the limbic system, mapping out how these brain regions interact. But what happens when the signals influencing our decisions come from places even less obvious? Let's dive into how subtle, often unconscious, inputs shape our behavior. Okay, let's start with something we all have but maybe don't think about much: smell. Our sense of smell is actually pretty underdeveloped compared to, say, a rat. Only about 3% of our brain is dedicated to it, versus a whopping 40% in rats. But here's the kicker. Even though it's small, our olfactory system has a VIP pass directly into the limbic system, the brain's emotional and memory hub. Other senses have to go through more processing stations first. Now, while we might not be sniffing out genetic compatibility quite like rodents, there are hints of similar pheromonal effects in humans. Think about the Wellesley effect. Women sometimes prefer men from rival colleges, possibly linked to scent. Or studies showing heterosexual women finding the scent of men with higher testosterone levels more attractive. But the really fascinating stuff is fear. Researchers got sweat samples from people after two different activities. One group ran comfortably, sweating happily, while another group had their first tandem skydive. Pure terror, remember, the instructor does the work, so it's psychological panic. People sniffed both types of sweat. Could they tell the difference? Nope. But here's where it gets wild. Sniffing the terrified sweat caused measurable changes. Amygdala activation, that's your brain's alarm bell ringing. A bigger startle response. They even got better at spotting angry faces and were more likely to see an ambiguous face as fearful. It's like your brain is subconsciously picking up on others' fear and tilting its own perception towards danger. Scary, right? Beyond smells, our bodies are constantly sending us internal reports: hunger pangs, aches, that weird gassy feeling. This is interoception, sensing what's going on inside. Now, this brings us to a classic, slightly bonkers idea from the 1880s by William James and Carl Lang. They proposed that we don't feel afraid because we see a lion. Instead, we see the lion, our heart starts pounding, and then our brain interprets that racing heart as, I must be terrified. The feeling follows the bodily reaction. Sounds weird, but there's some evidence. Ever notice how forcing a depressed person to smile can actually lift their mood? Or how adopting a powerful posture, like slouching versus standing tall, can genuinely make you feel more confident and lower stress hormones? Even muscle relaxants can reduce anxiety. Maybe because if your body is physically relaxed, your mind thinks, okay, things must be calming down. However, the strict version of James Lang doesn't quite hold water. How does your brain know if a racing heart means a lion chase, or just seeing someone incredibly attractive? That specificity issue is a big problem. Plus, many bodily reactions, like digestion slowing down, happen too slowly to explain the immediate jolt of emotion. So while interoception definitely plays a role, it's not the whole story. So if James Lang isn't fully right, how does this internal chatter actually influence our emotions and behavior? Well, those brain regions we talked about earlier, the prefrontal cortex, insular cortex, anterior cingulate, and especially the amygdala, are hotspots for processing social emotions. And guess what? They're flooded with interoceptive information. This helps explain why pain is such a reliable trigger for aggression. Pain hits those same emotional processing centers. But here's the crucial nuance. Pain doesn't cause aggression. It amplifies existing tendencies. If you're already prone to aggression, pain makes you more aggressive. If you're generally calm, pain might make you less aggressive, or just shut you down. It's like turning up the volume on whatever emotional dial was already set. And it gets even subtler. Remember willpower? That feeling of resisting temptation? Studies, largely by Roy Baumeister, show that when your frontal cortex is working hard on a complex task, right after, you become more aggressive and less empathetic, charitable, and honest. It's like your brain says, screw it, I'm mentally exhausted, I'm not thinking about being nice anymore. This seems tied to energy costs. Mental effort burns glucose. Give people sugar, their self-control improves. Get hungry? You become less charitable and more aggressive, like choosing harsher punishments in games. Is it that you literally can't control yourself, or that you just don't want to? The debate continues, but the point is clear. Over mere seconds to minutes, your internal state and cognitive load can dramatically sway your actions. All right, let's shift gears from internal bodily signals to external ones, specifically language. Words are powerful, obviously. They can heal or wound, inspire or devastate. But they can also subtly nudge our behavior without us even realizing it. Think about the prisoner's dilemma. that classic game about cooperation versus competition. Just changing the label of the game drastically changes behavior. Call it the Wall Street game, and people get competitive, less cooperative. Call it the community game, and suddenly they're all about teamwork. It's the framing. Embed a few seemingly random words before playing. Maybe words like help, harmony, fair, mutual, and cooperation goes up. Use words like rank, power, fierce, inconsiderate instead, and competition spikes. It's not like reading a sermon or a manifesto, it's just a list of words. Yet, unconsciously they shift our thoughts and feelings. Remember how framing affects decisions. Kahneman and Tversky showed this beautifully with a drug. Doctors were much more likely to prescribe it if told it had a 95% survival rate than if told it had a 5% death rate. Same outcome, different wording, vastly different acceptance. And it's not just major decisions. Read rude words, and you'll interrupt people sooner. Prime someone with loyalty, and they'll favor their team in economic games. Describe a moral violation as wrong versus forbidden, and people judge it more harshly. Language isn't just communication. It's a tool that shapes our immediate reactions and choices. The influence gets even more subtle when we consider the environment and our group identities. It's not just what we see or hear, but the context. In one study, simply having an American flag in the room made people express stronger egalitarian views. Seems minor, but it worked. Think about football matches. Researchers planned a person who slipped and fell. Did anyone help? Yes, but only if the fallen person was wearing the home team's colors. Wear neutral clothes or the opposing team's gear. Much less help. Why? Maybe perceived group membership. Another chilling example, pairs of Hispanic actors stood quietly talking in Spanish at train stations in predominantly white Boston suburbs. The result? White commuters expressed more negative attitudes towards Hispanic immigrants, but not other groups. Just being reminded of a specific group identity, even passively, could trigger bias. This gets complicated when people belong to multiple groups. Take the famous Asian American women math test study. We know stereotypes exist. Women are bad at math, Asians are good. When asked to take a math test, women primed to think about their racial identity, Asian American, performed better than those primed to think about their gender identity, woman. The context of the task activated the relevant identity that countered the stereotype. It shows how fluid and context-dependent our identities and resulting behaviors can be. Now let's talk about a famous social phenomenon, often misunderstood, the bystander effect. You've probably heard the story of Kitty Genovese, murdered in 1964, while dozens supposedly heard her screams and did nothing. This became the myth of the Genovese syndrome. The more people around, the less likely anyone is to help in an emergency. Turns out, the original story was riddled with inaccuracies, fewer witnesses, no one saw the whole thing, windows were closed, etc. But the quasi-myth persists. Here's the reality check. The bystander effect does happen, but mostly in situations where helping costs little, like calling for directions. In those cases, people diffuse responsibility, someone else will call. However, when it comes to dangerous emergencies requiring real intervention, the opposite often happens. More people present actually increases the likelihood of someone stepping forward. Why? Maybe it's about reputation. Imagine saving someone in front of a crowd. You get more credit for your heroism than if you did it alone. The social dynamics shift depending on the perceived cost and benefit of action. Let's look at another rapid social context effect, one often associated with, shall we say, less sophisticated male behavior. Studies consistently show that when men are around women, or even just thinking about them, they tend to engage in riskier behavior. They're more likely to discount future rewards, preferring a smaller payout now over a larger one later. And they spend more on luxury items, not basic necessities. Interestingly, this presence of women also tends to make men more aggressive. In competitive games, for instance, they might punish opponents with louder noise blasts. Now, before you jump to conclusions, there's a crucial caveat. If status is achieved through prosocial means, being generous, helpful, then the presence of women can actually make men more prosocial. One paper title sums it up nicely: Male Generosity as a Mating Signal. It suggests that sometimes, aggression isn't the only game in town. Prosociality can also be a strategy, especially when it signals desirable traits. Okay, moving beyond immediate moments to slightly longer timescales, hours to days. What influences us then? Enter the world of hormones. We'll explore how hormones interact with the brain and sensory systems we've discussed, shaping our behaviors. A prime example is the broken windows theory of crime developed by James Q. Wilson and George Kelling. The idea is simple but profound. Small signs of disorder in an urban environment, like litter, graffiti, or broken windows, create a slippery slope leading to more serious crime. Why? Because when littering or vandalism becomes the norm, it signals that nobody cares or has the power to maintain order. It becomes an invitation for more serious transgressions. This idea heavily influenced Rudy Giuliani's policing strategy in the 1990s New York, focusing on zero tolerance for minor offenses. And guess what? Serious crime plummeted. Similar results popped up elsewhere. Of course, critics pointed out that crime was already declining nationwide, making it hard to isolate the effect. But experiments support the core idea. Keith Kaiser did a neat study: chain a bike illegally to a fence, and suddenly people are way more likely to take a shortcut through a gap in that same fence. Graffiti on walls, more littering. Litter everywhere? More people steal money left out. It seems violating one social norm makes you more likely to violate another nearby norm. It's a slippery slope, even if unconscious. Now, here's a wonderfully complicating piece of the puzzle. We've talked about sensory information flowing into the brain, but what if the brain can also tune the sensitivity of those senses? Think about a dog pricking up its ears when it hears something. The brain is actively enhancing the ear's ability to detect sound. Or how you suddenly become hyper-aware of food smells when you're hungry. How does that work? It turns out the brain sends signals back down to the sensory organs. For instance, low blood sugar might activate certain hypothalamic neurons, which then project to and stimulate receptor neurons in your nose that respond to food odors. It doesn't make the receptors fire yet, but it lowers the threshold. Now it takes fewer food molecules to trigger a signal. This top-down control applies to behaviors too. Remember how eyes carry so much emotional information? Well, we naturally tend to look at eyes. Antonio Damasio studied a patient with Urbach-Wiethe disease, which selectively destroyed her amygdala. As expected, she struggled to recognize fearful faces. But she also looked far less at eyes, only about 25% of the time, compared to control's 50%. When instructed to focus on the eyes, her fear recognition improved. This shows the amygdala isn't just detecting fear, it's actively biasing our attention towards the eyes, the key windows into emotional states. This idea that our internal state and expectations can shape perception extends even further into culture. Consider this task: show someone a picture with a central object and a complex background. Within seconds, people from collectivist cultures, like China, tend to look more at the surrounding context and remember it better. People from individualistic cultures, like the US, tend to focus on the main object. It's almost instantaneous. Now try telling someone from the US to focus on the background, or tell someone from China to focus on the object. What happens? Their frontal cortex lights up. It takes effort, it's a difficult perceptual task against their ingrained cultural tendency. This isn't just about interpretation, it's about literally where and how you direct your gaze, shaped by cultural norms. Culture isn't just abstract ideas, it's embedded in our very perception of the world around us. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? First, brains don't operate in a vacuum. Over mere seconds to minutes, a flood of information, sights, smells, internal bodily signals, environmental cues, subtle contextual factors, even words, constantly streams into our brains. Second, this influx of information significantly influences the likelihood of our pro-social or anti-social actions. Third, the range of influencing factors is incredibly broad, from something as simple as shirt color to complex ideological cues. Fourth, our internal state, our interoceptive awareness, is also a major player. And most importantly, fifth, a huge chunk of this influence operates below our conscious awareness. The ultimate conclusion? In the critical moments just before we make some of our most important decisions, we are far less rational and autonomous than we like to believe. Our actions are profoundly shaped by a complex web of influences, many of which we never consciously register. Okay, let's zoom out again. We've seen how immediate cues shape behavior. Now let's look at influences spanning hours to days. What's operating on these timescales? Hormones. These chemical messengers circulate in our bodies and interact with the brain and sensory systems we've been discussing. How do they influence our best and worst behaviors? We'll focus on two key players: testosterone, often wrongly maligned as the sole driver of aggression, and oxytocin, celebrated as the hormone of love and trust. Spoiler alert, both have stories far more nuanced than their popular reputation suggests. Let's start with testosterone. It's the usual suspect whenever aggression is discussed. Why the link? Well, across the animal kingdom and human cultures, males commit most acts of violence. And testosterone fits the bill. Males generally have higher levels. Male aggression peaks during periods of peak male testosterone like adolescence or mating season. And there are lots of testosterone receptors in brain regions linked to aggression like the amygdala. Correlation is suggestive, but causation requires more. The classic test is subtraction and replacement. Subtract testosterone, remove testes, castration, and does aggression decrease? Yes, in animals and humans. Replace it, give back testosterone, and does the original level of aggression return? Yes, again in animals and humans. On the surface, it looks like a slam dunk. Testosterone causes aggression. Time to see how wrong that is. The first crack in the foundation appears after castration. Aggression plummets, sure, but it doesn't hit zero. Maybe the castration wasn't complete. Maybe adrenal glands still produce some androgens. Nope, even when all sources are eliminated, some aggression remains. This tells us some male aggression is testosterone independent. This is starkly illustrated by chemical castration of sex offenders. It reduces obsessive sexual urges but doesn't stop recidivism, especially for crimes driven by power or anger. And here's the kicker. The more aggressive a man was before castration, the more aggression continues afterward. It suggests that repeated aggression becomes less reliant on hormones and more on learned social patterns. Next issue, individual differences. Early studies found correlations between high testosterone and high aggression in prisoners, but causality was murky. Did aggression cause higher testosterone, or vice versa? The better question is, does your baseline testosterone predict your aggression? Across birds, fish, mammals, primates, and especially humans, the answer is generally no. As endocrinologist John Archer put it bluntly in 2006, the association is weak and inconsistent, and giving testosterone to volunteers typically doesn't increase aggression. The brain seems largely indifferent to normal fluctuations within the typical range. The only exception is supraphysiological doses, like steroid abuse, which can increase aggression but often involves individuals already predisposed, and anxiety might be a confounding factor. So, if it's not just about causing aggression, what does testosterone actually do to behavior? It turns out quite a few subtle things. It decreases empathic mimicry. You're less likely to unconsciously mirror someone's facial expression. It makes you worse at recognizing emotions, especially from strangers' eyes, and activates the amygdala more when looking at unfamiliar faces, rating them as less trustworthy. On the flip side, it boosts confidence, optimism, and reduces fear and anxiety. This explains the winner effect in animals. Winning a fight raises testosterone, which fuels more wins by increasing muscle metabolism and even making pheromones smell scarier. Winning also increases testosterone receptors in the brain, making it more sensitive to the hormone. Sounds great, right? Being fearless and optimistic? Well, it can lead to overconfidence and egocentrism, making you think your opinion is always right and ignore others. It increases impulsivity and risk-taking, pushing you towards the easy option even if it's foolish. Neurologically, this happens by dampening the prefrontal cortex's activity and its connection to the amygdala, while boosting the amygdala's direct connection to the thalamus, favoring fast, gut reactions over deliberate thought. Being fearless, overconfident, and delusionally optimistic feels pretty good, right? No surprise then that testosterone can be pleasurable. Rats will literally work to get testosterone injections, showing conditioned place preference. They develop a preference for a specific corner of their cage where they receive the hormone infusion. I don't know why, but I feel good there. The neurobiology backs this up perfectly. Testosterone increases dopamine release in the brain's reward pathways, ventral tegmentum to nucleus accumbens. Infusing testosterone directly into the nucleus accumbens induces place preference. Winning a fight even increases the number of testosterone receptors in these reward areas, making the hormone's feel-good effects even stronger. So testosterone does subtle things to behavior. But this still doesn't fully explain everything, because you could interpret any effect in multiple ways. Does it increase anxiety leading to reactive aggression, or decrease anxiety leading to preemptive aggression? Does it increase risk-taking for invasion or for peace offers? Does feeling good lead to more fighting or more cooperation? The crucial unifying concept is this: testosterone's effects are hugely context-dependent. It doesn't cause X, it amplifies the power of something else to cause X. This context dependency led to a wonderfully unifying theory called the challenge hypothesis, proposed by John Wingfield and colleagues in 1990. The core idea is that rising testosterone levels primarily increase aggression only during a challenge, a direct contest for status, mates, or resources. This explains why baseline testosterone levels have little predictive power for general aggression, and why surges due to puberty or mating season don't automatically mean more aggression. But during challenges, things change. Among primates, testosterone rises when dominance hierarchies form or shift. In humans, it surges before and after competitive sports events, especially in winners. Even watching your favorite team win raises your testosterone. It's less about physical exertion and more about the psychology of dominance, identification, and self-esteem. The key insight is that the context of the testosterone rise dictates the behavioral outcome. The same hormone surge can mean different things depending on the situation. The challenge hypothesis has a second, even more surprising part. When testosterone rises after a challenge, it doesn't just push towards aggression. Instead, it prompts whatever behaviors are needed to maintain status. Okay, fine, you say. Maintaining status for primates often means aggression. But what if defending your status requires being nice? This was tested by Eisenegger and Fair in a study using the ultimatum game. In this game, fairness and reputation are crucial for status. What happened when subjects received testosterone beforehand? They made more generous offers. The hormone promoted prosociality because that's what maintaining status demanded in that specific context. It's not about the hormone itself, but what counts as being studly or maintaining status in that situation. There was even a slick placebo effect. Subjects who believed they'd receive testosterone, regardless of the actual dose, made less generous offers. Belief matters. Other studies confirm this. Testosterone promotes honesty when pride depends on it and encourages contributions to common pools. The implication is profound. The problem isn't testosterone per se. The problem is our social systems that so frequently reward aggression as a way to gain and maintain status. If testosterone got a bum rap, oxytocin and its close relative vasopressin are currently enjoying a Teflon presidency. According to popular lore, these hormones are the magic bullets for reducing aggression, boosting trust, empathy, bonding, and parental care. Spray oxytocin up someone's nose, and suddenly they're more faithful partners, better parents, more charitable rats, even fruit flies singing like Joan Baez. Naturally, reality is more complicated, and these hormones have their own informative dark side. Let's start with the basics. Oxytocin and vasopressin are chemically similar, their genes are similar, and they evolved from a duplicated gene millions of years ago. For decades, neurobiologists largely ignored them. They were seen as boring peripheral hormones, oxytocin for labor and milk letdown, vasopressin for kidney function. Made in the hypothalamus, released into the bloodstream, and that was it. End of story. Then things got interesting. Scientists discovered that the neurons making these hormones also send projections throughout the brain, hitting regions like the amygdala, hippocampus, and frontal cortex. Plus, they're synthesized and secreted within the brain itself. Suddenly, these boring peripheral hormones were revealed as neuropeptides, small protein messengers acting directly in the brain. The initial findings about their behavioral effects made perfect sense. Oxytocin prepares the female body for birth and lactation, so logically it facilitates maternal behavior. Brain boosts oxytocin during birth, and virgin rats infused with it start acting like mothers, grooming and retrieving pups. Block oxytocin in a mother rat and she stops nursing. It even helps mothers learn their baby's unique smells. Vasopressin plays a similar, though often milder, role. Then fathers got into the act. When a female rodent gives birth, nearby fathers experience increased vasopressin and receptors, enhancing paternal behaviors in species where males are involved in parenting like prairie voles. Then came the fascinating link to monogamy. Prairie voles are famously monogamous, unlike their promiscuous cousins, the montane voles. Sex releases oxytocin and vasopressin in the nucleus accumbens, the brain's reward center, in both species. But prairie voles don't release more. They have more receptors for these hormones in the neck. Gene studies confirmed this. Tweaking vasopressin receptors in voles could make promiscuous males pair bond. Humans? Circulating oxytocin is higher in new couples, linked to affection and relationship stability. Spritzing oxytocin up the nose during conflicts improves communication and reduces stress. Intriguingly, it seems to unconsciously strengthen pair bonds. Heterosexual men in relationships, given oxytocin, unconsciously increased their distance from an attractive female researcher and looked away more. It wasn't that they found her less attractive, just less interested. Oxytocin and vasopressin clearly facilitate bonding. Following its role in bonding, oxytocin and vasopressin act as calming agents. They inhibit the central amygdala, suppressing fear and anxiety, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. As Sue Carter puts it, exposure to oxytocin is a physiological metaphor for safety. They reduce aggression in rodents, and silencing the system makes mice abnormally aggressive. In humans, oxytocin makes people rate faces as more trustworthy and increases trust in economic games, but only when interacting with another person, not a computer. Normally, betrayal in a game reduces trust later, but oxytocin-treated investors didn't show this betrayal aversion. Call it irrational gullibility or turning the other cheek. More pro-socially, oxytocin makes people better at detecting happy faces or positive words, enhances theory of mind activity, and makes them more responsive to social reinforcement like smiles. It creates a warm and fuzzy positive feedback loop. Prosocial behavior releases oxytocin, which makes you more prosocial. Okay, time to settle down. Are these hormones truly about universal prosociality, or are they about becoming more socially competent, better at gathering accurate social information, which could be used for good or ill? The evidence suggests both. They enhance eye contact, emotion reading accuracy, and theory of mind activity. Women improve at detecting kinship, men at dominance relations. They improve face and smell recognition. Neuroimaging links gene variants to fusiform face area activation. This ties into autism spectrum disorders, where ASD is linked to oxytocin vasopressin gene variants, receptor silencing, and lower receptor levels. Interestingly, oxytocin can improve social skills in some individuals with ASD. So sometimes it's prosociality, sometimes it's social competence. But the effects are contingent. Gender matters, different effects in men and women. Genetics matter, sensitive parenting variants linked to prosociality, but also potentially bias. Culture matters, oxytocin enhances support seeking only under stress in Americans, not Koreans. And now for the dark side. While oxytocin decreases aggression in females, it increases maternal aggression specifically for defending pups. Similarly, vasopressin increases aggression in paternal prairie voles. Both effects depend on prior aggression levels, social learning again. Crucially, oxytocin increases trust and cooperation only within group members. Without group strangers, it decreases cooperation and increases envy and gloating. Karsten Dadreo's studies are stunning. Oxytocin made subjects less likely to sacrifice a Dutch named Dirk or Peter to save 5 unnamed people, compared to sacrificing a German or Middle Eastern name. Oxytocin, the love hormone, makes us more prosocial to us and worse to others. That's not generic prosociality, that's ethnocentrism and xenophobia. Context is everything. Finally, let's briefly touch upon the endocrinology of aggression in females. This area confuses me, and frankly, it's incredibly complex. Hormone levels fluctuate wildly, ratios matter more than absolute levels, and the brain responds differently depending on the combination. Progesterone rarely works directly, it's converted into neurosteroids. Estrogen isn't just one thing. And let's debunk the myth that females are always nice unless protecting babies. Maternal aggression peaks during pregnancy, driven by estrogen and progesterone boosting oxytocin release. But there are complications. Estrogen has opposing effects via different receptors, and progesterone alone can decrease anxiety. Beyond maternal aggression, female-female competition is real and strategic, not just passive or crazy. Females compete for resources, mates, or even kill rivals' infants. Androgen receptors exist in female brains selected for specific functions. Some species even have reversed sex roles, like bonobos or hyenas, where females are dominant and more aggressive. The hyena example is wild. Females hunt, dominate socially, and due to high fetal androgen exposure, develop pseudo-hermaphroditic features. It shows that aggression and dominance aren't exclusive male traits. So wrapping up this section, we've seen how behavior is shaped by a constant interplay of unconscious sensory inputs, internal bodily signals, environmental cues, subtle contextual factors, and hormonal influences. Key themes emerge. Much of this influence operates below our conscious awareness. The effects of hormones like testosterone and oxytocin are heavily dependent on context, amplifying existing tendencies rather than causing behaviors outright, and the simple narratives surrounding these hormones are often misleading. The bottom line is that human behavior is far more complex and driven by a multitude of unseen influences than we often acknowledge.